So far, you're not seeing Hamas disarming, and President and the Vice President have both said no boots on the ground. So really, what's next?
I would say neither of those developments are surprising. So even before the positive events of the last week, there was no agreement from Hamas about its willingness to disarm. So the fact that they're resisting disarming is completely consistent with expectations. So if we look at the 20-point plan, or I would say aspirational plan that was put in place, the first several points were very specific around a ceasefire and around the release of hostages and returns of the remains of other hostages. That went relatively well because it was very specific. Now we have a whole set of points, or I'd say really objectives, that are much more ambitious. They have to do with the disarmament of Hamas. They have to do with who is actually going to secure Gaza, who is going to govern Gaza. These are issues that are going to take an enormous amount of attention to detail and negotiation. So I'm very pleased to see the Vice President, along with other senior advisors to the President, in Israel today, because keeping the ceasefire is going to be difficult, but arranging the details of what comes next is going to require an excessive amount of attention to detail, negotiation, and coordination of actors in the region, particularly Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, in order to put sufficient pressure on Hamas.
Meghan, the line today from Vice President JD Vance is there will be hills and valleys. And it seemed the message he really went there to stress was the fact that this might not be nice and neat in the coming days and weeks, the outset of a ceasefire. But of course, that needs to be said right now, correct? After what we saw over the weekend here, Israel launching strikes against Hamas in Gaza, suspending all aid shipments, blaming Hamas for a lethal Palestinian ambush that left 2 soldiers dead. How fragile is this ceasefire?
I would say the ceasefire is very fragile. You recounted the events of this weekend that make it very obvious that it's fragile. I would imagine that the very clear message that these 3 individuals brought to Prime Minister Netanyahu today was, and to his cabinet, that you must maintain the ceasefire, and that Israel is, on alert that that is the president's highest priority at this very moment. And that's important because there will be challenges. Obviously, we've seen from Palestinian on Palestinian violence inside of Gaza, there's a lot that's unleashed. And it's not an over-exaggeration to call Gaza right now a tinderbox. And the real challenge, I think, is to see that the ceasefire endures, even though it will be challenged. Because without the ceasefire, the prospect of getting to these additional steps, which have some hope of stabilizing Gaza, which is good for the Gazans who are there and also good for Israel and the region, will evaporate. So while it's fragile, I would say that I do have a certain amount of confidence that as long as President Trump and the Trump administration remain very focused on maintaining the ceasefire, and that other countries in the region remain engaged, that hopefully that will endure. And again, the real questions in my mind come afterwards, come in the next steps: how to make this durable, how to govern it, and how to secure it for the short, medium, and long run.
And of course, the future of Ukraine right now up in the air. Just a little while ago, President Trump commented about not wanting a wasted meeting when he was talking about his upcoming meeting with Vladimir Putin. So that now seems up in the air. President Zelensky left here with no guarantees and no Tomahawk missiles. So really, where does that stand right now?
I think it stands, pretty much where it has stood for the last several months, which is that President Trump is increasingly frustrated, particularly with Putin, looking really very, very intensively to try to wrap up what is happening in Ukraine and kind of have a double whammy, a ceasefire in Gaza and something similar in Ukraine. The president appearing to be pretty willing to push for a deal that would freeze the line of conflict where it is now, and that would end up de facto giving Russia some territorial gains. The situation remains that Vladimir Putin wants more, and he believes that time is aside. He believes that he and the Russian people have an enormous ability to be patient and to endure significant amounts of economic disruption and pain, and that that will outlast certainly the interest of the Trump administration, the will of the Europeans, and the abilities of the Ukrainians to fight. So that's Vladimir Putin's bet. He tends to talk to President Trump when he thinks that maybe Trump is getting to some kind of inflection point where he will take action to either put more pressure on Russia or to provide more resources to Zelensky and Ukraine. And that's what happened in the last few days. Putin sensed that Zelensky was going to come, that it was a possibility that he would get Tomahawk missiles, which would definitely, be a significant escalation of American support. And he diffused that with a phone call, probably some nice words, an indication, leaving the president with some hope that there was a negotiated settlement that could be within its grasp. And then, as we see with this meeting, it looks like it's not really a done deal and that we don't have any dates. And the words are maybe not in the foreseeable future.
Meghan, in the really short time we have left, I did want to ask you about the piece you wrote about the weaponization of minerals. Can you talk about how minerals has played such a role, whether it's with Australia or in the upcoming meeting with President Xi?
Sure. Thank you for asking. It's an article in Foreign Affairs that came out today. It refers to my co-author, Jason Bordoff, and I write about what we anticipate will be a current age of weaponization of energy. So, of course, that's oil, that's gas, but it also today includes critical minerals, which are valuable for energy resources, but they're also valuable for defense and other applications. And essentially, we make the case that the last 50 years have been ones in which most producers kind of gave up on the idea that embargoing resources, commodities of any type, was going to be advantageous. And part of this had to do with the fact that the world was rapidly globalizing and markets were becoming global and more integrated. And that made it much harder to be a producer to withhold a resource because a country could get it from somewhere else. Today, we're seeing a fragmentation of the global economy, and we're seeing this rivalry between the U.S. and China's dominance of critical minerals. So this is really setting us up for potentially a new age of energy weaponization.